Today I'm going to talk to you just briefly about Slope-Intercept Form. This is just a quick introduction. You've actually already been working with Slope-Intercept Form for a couple of weeks here as we've been graphing in Slope-Intercept Form, but today we're just going to look at it numerically, and I'm going to kind of show you a few different ways to look at Slope-Intercept Form. So I wrote right here, y equals mx plus b. That's how we usually see Slope-Intercept Form written, and it's kind of the standard. If you remember from when we're graphing, when you see this equation right here, we know that m equals the slope, okay? Tells us how steep our graph is. And then b is the y-intercept, okay? It tells us where our line crosses the y-axis. So graphically, that looks something like this, right? Where we have a y-axis and an x-axis, okay? And the y-intercept can be anywhere along our y-axis there, right? It could be here, it could be up here, it could be way down here. Okay? And then the slope tells us how steep our line is, right? Sometimes it's written as a whole number, other times we have it written as a rational number, like a fraction, which tells us our rise over run. So if it was 2 over 3, we'd go up 2 and over 3, make another point, right? We can keep going on and on. So just remember, y-intercept tells us where it crosses the y-axis. Slope tells us how steep our line is. And it's really important to be able to look at an equation of a line, like this guy I've got right here, and figure out what the slope is and what the y-intercept is, okay? So slope is always going to be the number that's attached to x. Sometimes it's a fraction, sometimes it's a positive number, sometimes it's a negative number, but it's always the number that's directly in front of x, okay, our variable x here. So in this case, my slope, my slope is 3, and then the y-intercept is the number that's just by itself. I know sometimes I say hanging out at the end. It's, as we'll see in a few examples, it doesn't always just hang out at the end. But the y-intercept is the number that's just by itself, okay? So I'm going to say b, the y-intercept, equals 6. There's another way that we can write the y-intercept that will be important for completing today's homework. Think about graphing that y-intercept there. If I have my axes, my x and y axis, we know that the y-intercept is going to cross at 6 up here on the y-axis, right? So I could make a point right there. Now I'd ask you, how can we write this point in coordinate form? Okay, coordinate form is the parentheses, where our x value comes first, and then our y value. So if I was trying to write this point right here, how would I write it if it was in parentheses? Well, I don't move to the left or to the right in the x direction to get that point right there. So I know the x value of that point is 0. And then the y value of the point we already know, right? It's 6. So I can write that point as 0, 6. So another way for us to write our y-intercept that we're going to practice today is 0, 6. Okay, just 0 for the x value and then whatever the y value is. Let's take a look at another example here in identifying slope. Again, my slope is going to be the number that's directly in front of x. Here I'm going to include my negative sign, and it's like an imaginary -1. So my slope is -1. We would go down 1 over 1, make a point. Down 1 over 1, make a point. Okay? Now we need to figure out what the y-intercept is. Okay? And the y-intercept is the number that's just by itself with no variable attached to it. And notice I'm including the negative, so the y-intercept is -2. So in order to start graphing that guy, we'd go down to -2, make a point. I want to write that guy in coordinate form, and so my y-intercept in coordinate form is 0, -2. Let's take a look at this next guy here. Here we have a fractional slope, right? So we can clearly see what our rise and our run are. In the other example right there, we would just go down 1 over 1, right? But here, it's pretty clear that we're going to go up 2 over 3. Because we got the fraction in front of our variable x. So my slope is 2 over 3. And then the y-intercept is the number that's just by itself, hanging out at the end. In this case, it's positive, so b equals 6. And again, I want to write it in coordinate form, which I'm going to write as 0, 6. Right? If we were to graph that point 0, 6, we'd go 0 in the x direction, up by 6, make a point. And sure enough, that's a y-intercept there. Let's go down to some other examples here. Ooh, I got y equals 4 minus 2x. So this one's not following our traditional pattern of mx plus b, right? But finding the pieces is still the same process. To find my slope, I'm going to look for where my x is, And I know it's the number that's directly in front of x, including that negative sign that's right there. That negative sign belongs to the 2, not to the 4. Right, so my slope is negative 2. We could also say negative 2 over an imaginary 1, right? If we were going to graph it, right, it's negative 2, run 1. And then the y-intercept is the number that's all by itself. Notice that it's just 4, right? It's not negative 4 because the negative belongs to the 2. We don't write a negative sign after the number. We write it before. So in this case, my y-intercept is equal to 4. And if I was going to write that as a coordinate point, it would be 0, 4. Running over here, a little sloppily written, sorry, but that's negative 1 over 2. So again, my slope is the number that's directly in front of x, which is negative 1/2. And then my y-intercept is the number that's by itself, including that negative sign there, so b equals negative 4. Notice the difference between that example, between this example and then the previous example, where I had a positive 4 for a y-intercept, but here I've got a negative 4 because there's a negative sign in front of the 4. So when I write that in coordinate form, it's 0, negative 4. And a final example here, picking out the information from an equation of a line written in slope-intercept form. Again, my slope is going to be the number that's directly in front of x, okay? It's not the number that comes first necessarily. It's the number that's directly in front of x, which in this case is an imaginary 1, right? So I would rise 1, run 1. So my slope is 1. And my y-intercept is the number that's all by itself, which in this case is a negative 6. And again, if I were going to write that in coordinate form, I would write it as 0, negative 6. And that's my y-intercept. Another thing that you're going to be asked to do in today's homework is it will give you the sentence somewhat like this, kind of some information about a line, and ask you to write the equation, okay? So here we're asked to write the equation of the line whose y-intercept is 0, negative 7, and slope is 6. And what I'm going to do really quick right here is just copy our formula from before at the very top. That y equals mx plus b. So y equals mx plus b. And all I have to do is replace a number for a number for m and a number for b. Okay, and so my y-intercept is 0, negative 7, which means the y value of my intercept is negative 7. So I know that's going to go there where b is. We could write plus a negative 7, but it's the same thing as saying minus 7, so I'm just going to write that. And then our slope is 6. So 6 is going to go right where the m is. So now that says 6. So y equals 6x minus 7. Now sometimes we'll have a fraction for a slope, right? In this example we did not, so it was just y equals 6x minus 7. In order to check our work, we could start with this equation that we just wrote here that I'm going to box. And we could say, hey, what's the slope? And what's the y-intercept? Just to make sure we did our work correctly. So the slope is the number right in front of x, which I see as 6. The y-intercept is negative 7. And if we were to write that in coordinate form, it would be 0, negative 7. Let's see, we started with a slope of 6, so that's good. And we started with a y-intercept where the full coordinate form was 0, negative 7. So it looks good. I think we did our work correctly. Let's take a look at one more example here when we're writing a line. Write the equation of the line whose y-intercept is 0, 2, and slope is negative 3. Again, I'm going to copy the equation right here so I can see exactly what I need to replace. I need to replace a number for m, and I need to replace a number for b. We're going to keep y and x because those are our two variables that relate to each other here. Okay. Figure out what the y-intercept is here. I see that the y value is 2 for the y-intercept, so that's going to go where I see b. In this case, I can leave that plus sign because it's a positive 2. Y equals mx plus b. And then the slope is going to be a negative 3. So I'm going to put negative 3 in front of x, making sure I include that negative sign. Again, I'm just going to practice my check one more time to make sure I did my work correctly. So looking at that line, the equation of the line there in the green box, I see that my slope is equal to the number in front of x, which is negative 3 in this case. And my y-intercept equals 2, okay, the number that's all by itself, and I can write that in coordinate form as 0, 2. Here comes my check, -3 slope, yep, slope is -3, 0, 2 for the y-intercept, 0, 2. Looks pretty good. Today for your homework, all you have to do is the 4 Intro to Slope questions on Khan Academy. Feel free to zoom in if you have any questions.